What up, gang? Carolina Jackpot time coming at you. It is June the 7th, 2024. That also means it is Friday evening. It has been an extremely hot day in the upstate of South Carolina. Pretty sure it's hot wherever you guys and gals are located at, but I hope you've had a great day. Lets me know that it's going to be an extremely long, hot summer. I'm here for it. I hope you guys and gals are as well. And it's time to kick off the preview and prediction videos for the 2024 college football season. And who better to put it number one than the team that's number one on my mind and number one in my heart, and that is the South Carolina Gamecocks, the de facto namesake of this channel. Normally I do this prediction video pretty late in the off season, almost maybe a week or two before the season starts, because I want to get all my ducks in a row before I do it. This year I'm switching things up. I want to get some more exposure to the channel. I want to get everybody to watch this video, and then hopefully they will watch the subsequent videos that I do. And those subsequent videos are going to come from the comments that you guys leave in the comment section below these videos. I already have a small list of teams that I'm going to do videos on, but it's not near complete yet, so you can feel free to leave one down in the comment section below. I'll try to get to it at some point in time. I have a little lineup of teams that I'm going to do. I'm not making promises I'm going to finish all of them. That's why I don't want to commit to anything, and that's why I want to get this one out there really early. Before we get into any of this, subscribe to this channel if you are not subscribed already. I do college football content here all year long. We have a heck of a good time doing it, especially during the football live streams of the games during the season. That's when it really gets lit in here. Feel free to share this video out somewhere. Share it to Twitter. Share it to a Facebook group that you may be in. Share it via instant messenger to another Gamecock fan or just another college football fan in general that you have. We need to get the word out about the channel. Everybody out there says, I love Carolina Jackpot. This channel's really underrated. You should have more subscribers. Well, the only way we're going to get more subscribers is if you guys click the like button, make sure you're subscribed, and share the videos out so that the other folks can see them, so that they can get out to the masses, if you will. Appreciate that. So we're going to talk about 2023 briefly. Then we're going to talk about the players, the coaches that we have coming in 2024, what's changed, what's different. And then I'm going to throw the schedule up on the big board, and we are going to break down every single game, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser and a final record prediction for the Gamecocks at the end of the 2024 season. And it doesn't matter if you like the Gamecocks, if you don't like the Gamecocks, if you agree with my prediction, if you think my prediction is 100% delusional horse shit, feel free to comment down in the comment section below. I really appreciate you guys, and this is a very interactive channel, and it's very anti-formulaic, and I want to continue it to be as such. So let's get into it. Talking about the Gamecocks, 2023 season, the Gamecocks ended up finishing up 5-7 overall. Their over-under win total last year by Vegas was set at 6.5 wins, and it was juiced slightly to the under. That means Vegas thought they were going to go 6-6 or worse. Carolina Jackpot predicted 6-6 in the video that I did last August, and I was a horrendous prevent defense call in the last 2 minutes of the Florida game away from the Gamecocks finishing 6-6, albeit the wins and losses would have been a little bit different than what I predicted. This year's over-under win total is set at 5.5, and it is slightly juiced to the under currently. The odds are sitting at minus 114 to the under, minus 106 to the over, which means if you bet $100 for the Gamecocks to win over 5.5 games, that means they go 6-6 or better, then you're going to win yourself $94. If you bet $100 that the Gamecocks are going to go 5-7 or worse, you're going to win like $86. So not a lot of discrepancy there. It's kind of a thin line. It seems like a lot of people don't know what to expect from the Gamecocks, and quite frankly, that has been the prevailing theme in the offseason for a lot of years. They are just a really hard team to kind of get a handle on. We're almost like the Auburn of the old SEC East, but Auburn had a little bit more success as a team. Shane Beamer heads into his fourth season in Columbia as 2018 or 20-18 in 3 years here in Columbia. He was much maligned, really, especially from pretty much after the North Carolina game last year that the Gamecocks were I think they were a slight underdog. They kind of got blown out. He was really under a lot of scrutiny, and people gave him a real hard time about his responses in the press conferences. He did not win one press conference last year. We went from him blaming the referees wanting to wait on hot dogs, and that's why he couldn't do a trick play in the North Carolina game to start the second half. We went from to calling out the fan base for not being excited because South Carolina barely beat Jacksonville State. Yeah, I get Jacksonville State was a good team last year, but they're the 1 year removed from being the FCS, dude. Get over it. He's talking about the shitters and the toilets over at Missouri and their field house or whatever. Dude, get over it. They kicked your ass. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're shitting in a damn hole in the ground outside or an outhouse. They still beat the damn hell out of you. What difference does that have to do with anything? Kicking water coolers, breaking his foot, crying openly with tears after the Clemson game because you lost, because, quite frankly, your offensive line couldn't block a nosebleed. Had they been able to, you would have won that game. Aside from all that, Shane Beamer has done some good things at South Carolina. One of them is getting some love from his players. I think the players really enjoy playing for Beamer. I think they really have a family-type atmosphere there. The 2024 recruiting class came in at number 22 overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite, which is not a real high ranking in terms of SEC teams, but they only brought in 16 commitments. And they had a 90.74 player average, which was higher than 7 teams above the Gamecocks, including Michigan and our rivals over at Clemson. The recruiting has not been bad at all. He brings in a stud 5-star defensive edge rusher in Dylan Stewart from the Washington, D.C. area. Shane has really done a good job, and his staff has done a really good job of recruiting the Delmarva area, which is the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, Tidewater area, which also includes Washington, D.C. There's a lot of good football programs there, a lot of good talent that comes out of there, and South Carolina has gotten more than their share of it. Nicholas Harbor also came from the same area in the 2023 class, also a 5-star. The schedule for 2024. It's extremely tough, and it includes 9 teams that made bowls in 2023, and it includes 7 teams that are ranked in Athlon's top 25 going into the 2024 season. But guess what, guys? This is an SEC schedule. I get so sick and tired of hearing Gamecock fans that complain and whine about the schedule and use it as an excuse for this is why we're going to have a bad season, or this is why we can't ever win here because we got a tough schedule. When South Carolina joined the SEC in 1991, first football season in the SEC being in 1992, they knew what they were getting themselves into. They knew they were going to be facing really good competition every week. In the years to follow that, it has went from really good competition to elite competition, the best conference in college football. It's going to be this way every year, guys. You may get some years where it's not as tough as others, but some years these teams are all going to be on point, and it's just something that you have to start dealing with. How about bulking up the roster, getting some better players there, and let's start winning some of these games. Then maybe it wouldn't be quite so tough. Let's see about that, huh? Let's do about that. But this one is going to be a tough schedule. And just talking about some of the key questions for the Gamecocks heading into the 2024 slate. Number one question is, who's going to replace Spencer Rattler at quarterback? Guy that was drafted drafted in the 5th round overall by the New Orleans Saints. Rattler drafted way too low. A lot of that had to do with the teams or players ahead of him were probably a little bit better draftable as quarterbacks. Another part of it, I think, had to do with some of his shenanigans back in high school on the QB1 show on Netflix back in 2017, which has nothing to do with 2023, 2024. But guess what? It's not how you start, it's how you finish. Who's going to replace him, though? Lenore Sellers, the in-state three-star quarterback who committed to Virginia, then he flipped, he committed to Syracuse, now he goes and commits to the Gamecocks. Was a freshman last year, saw some limited duty, and he looked really, really good in that limited duty. Threw a couple of touchdown passes, ran for a couple more. The big 6'4", 240-pound dual threat. He's out of South Florence High School and is a local product. This guy has kind of become a fan favorite, kind of a cult fan favorite, not only among Gamecock fans, but also among fans of other teams. I've noticed our buddy Sports Talk Jay, the Tennessee YouTuber, has said he's pulling for this guy. He likes him because he wears goggles. Well, whatever it takes. We'll take as many fans as we can get there, Sports Talk Jay. His backup's going to be Robbie Ashford, a guy who transferred in from Auburn. He had his starting job with the Auburn Tigers taken last year by Peyton Thorne, a guy who transferred in from Michigan State under new head coach Hugh Freeze. Supposed to be a dual threat quarterback, but his only threat is with his legs. Robbie Ashford is not a very good thrower of the football. His accuracy is not good. His arm is just, it's very weak, and he's just not who you need operating your offense. You're going to be very one-dimensional if you have Robbie Ashford as a starting quarterback, and that's what really, really hurt Auburn in 2022, and ended up getting Brian Harsin fired. Lenoris is going to be playing with a totally retooled offensive system, and it's all going to be modeled around him. He's not a pocket passer like Spencer Rattler is. He is a dual-threat quarterback. He's going to be a load to bring down. He kind of is in the mold of a KJ Jefferson. Some folks have already compared him to Cam Newton. I think that's a little bit premature. But they're going to go with more of a downhill running game with him versus that pro-style attack they went with under Rattler. They bring in out of the transfer portal Raheem Rocket Sanders, the 2002 first-team All-SEC player from Arkansas. Rushed for about 1,400 yards, missed most of 2023 with an injury. He's had an injured shoulder, and he's had some other things that have banged him up as well. Still a very, very talented player, and him being healthy is a key to South Carolina's season. They also, out of the transfer portal, brought in Oscar Attaway and Jawarn Howell from South Carolina State, Attaway being from North Texas. These guys were both kind of bell cow running backs on their respective teams, and Jawarn Howell is going to be a sophomore. This guy was a true freshman last year, surprised a lot of people. He comes from the Mooresville, North Carolina area. Nobody had this dude on their radar, but he is legit. Whether he's going to be successful against SEC competition or not, we shall see. The wide receiver room is a concern for the Gamecocks. Of course, the guy that would have been heads and shoulders above everybody else in this wide receiver room would have been Juice Wells, who ended up transferring out to Ole Miss. Now, Juice Wells was an All-SEC selection in 2022 after transferring in from James Madison. He missed almost the entire 2023 season because of injury. We've already rehashed over and over whether he was really hurt or whether he wasn't. It doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is, he was here in 2023. If Ole Miss had gotten the 2022 Juice Wells, that'd really be something. They got 2023 Juice Wells. I don't know. I don't really know that it was that big of a loss, but you don't have him, and you don't have that stud number one wide receiver that Xavier Legette ended up developing into last year. The room that we brought in transfer portal-wise is really kind of undersized. So they went out in the spring transfer portal window, brought in one wide receiver from Nevada who has some size, and also one that I'm interested to see in Vandravius Jacobs, who I believe will be a sophomore. He may even still be considered a redshirt freshman from Florida State. This guy has a tremendous upside. He was a four-star recruit out of the state of Florida. Didn't get to play a lot last year at FSU because that wide receiver room was loaded. The Seminole fans were not happy to see this guy leave, so that tells me that he's got some upside to him. At the tight end position, they returned Joshua Simon, who had several touchdown catches last year, kind of in a backup role to Trey Knox, sometimes doubling on the field with Knox at the same time, and they bring in tight end Brady Hunt, an all-conference player from Ball State. this Xavier Legette was kind of a do-it-all receiver for the Gamecocks last year, and they just don't simply have that. Legette could get past the blocks, the line of scrimmage. He was big, physical. We don't have that kind of person on the roster this year, in my opinion, unless the 5-star that I mentioned, Nicholas Harbor, turns into that guy. Now, Nicholas Harbor has been concentrating a lot on track and field. He has just ran an insanely fast time on the 200 meters. This guy is slated. He may be a participant in the Olympics, which, Shane Beamer says that Nicholas Harbor is spending a ton of time in the football room when he's not on the track. But he really needs to spend a lot of time and devote it to football, because he was not a good wide receiver last year. He simply wasn't. He couldn't catch the ball. He wasn't running routes correctly. He looked kind of lost at times, but you could see the absolute raw athleticism and speed there. I, along with a lot of other Gamecock fans, think that this young man is simply playing out of position. He was a defensive end in high school. He was really dominant. Why not leave him where he was at? I don't understand this trying to fit a square peg into a round hole philosophy that we have to go with. But if you can get someone with that type of speed, that type of size, that type of athleticism to be able to play wide receiver, they could virtually be unstoppable. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like he's able to devote enough time to the game to train enough to be unstoppable. There's only 24 hours in a day. So we will absolutely have to see where that goes from there. A key thing to the 2024 season for the Gamecocks is also going to be, you have got to have improved play along the offensive line. Last year was an absolute abomination. There were a ton of injuries. There were depth concerns on the offensive line. You allowed a ton of sacks just starting right out of the gate. You allowed 9 to a North Carolina defense that looked like it was going to be good, but obviously it wasn't loaded, and no one was really impressed with it going into the season, and it turned out it really wasn't that good. So what can we do to improve that? Strength and conditioning and practice, and adding better players. You bring in, you return left tackle Tree Babalade and guard Trayon Ball. Both these guys were pressed into action early last year as true freshmen before they were really ready to. At center, Vershawn Lee is probably going to be your starter. He is a senior and a leader on your team. You've got some young talent coming in 4-star or almost 5-star, depending on where you look at. Josiah Thompson out of Dillon, South Carolina. Also Cam Pringle, not Poingle, there's no W in this dude's name, who's also a highly regarded prospect out of the state of South Carolina. Another one that I'm interested to see how they develop at the SEC level is Torricelli Simpkins, a guy who can play center or guard, transfers in from North Carolina Central. This guy was the MEAC, which is an FCS conference, Offensive Lineman of the Year. Interested to see how he transitions to the SEC level. Shane Beamer has been really high on him in press conferences. We'll have to see how that pans out. You're going to have a new place kicker as well. Alex Herrera, a senior, is going to get his chance to be the kicker, unless this young man, Mason Love, out of the state of Missouri, ends up taking the job. Now, Mason Love punts, and he's a place kicker as well. Of course, your former place kicker, Mitch Jeter, transferred out and decided to go to Notre Dame. That's just a really strange transfer to me. People might say, well, it's because Pete Limbo, your outgoing special teams coach, who everybody loved, ended up taking the head coaching job at Buffalo. Well, I think that Mitch Jeter transferred way before that happened. Limbo didn't end up taking that job until January, if I'm not mistaken. That's going to be a key loss for the Gamecocks. They're bringing back pretty much the same coaching staff, and they bring in a guy out of that's an NFL special teams guru. His name escapes me right now. Call me an idiot. So they should be okay there, but as far as Beamer ball goes, there was nobody better at assisting with that than Pete Limbo. And congratulations to Pete for getting that head coaching job there. This team was last in sacks and tackles for loss last year. Really poor play up front at times, but after getting torched through the first 9 games, the defense switched to kind of a 3-3-5 formation late in 2023, and they went from giving up 31 points per game to giving up 12 points per game. Played Clemson and didn't even give up an offensive touchdown. Still lost the game, but those are all things that are pointing up. And that defense looked really good in the spring game. I know it's just a spring game. There's no kind of correlation between the spring game and what's going to happen on August the 31st, right? Or maybe there is. Defense looked like it was fired up. They looked really, really good. And I was very impressed with Dylan Stewart and what he did in the spring game. They've got to be able to produce some negative plays defensively. There's just no way around it. With the uncertainties on the offensive side of the ball, South Carolina is going to have to come up big on the defensive side of the ball, and that has been an issue in years past. So we're going to have to really get this thing together. That 5-star Dylan Stewart, like I said, he looked really great in the spring. I think he's going to see some significant playing time in 2024. Kyle Kennard is another player that I'm very interested to see how he does. He was a huge transfer portal get from the Gamecocks. 53 tackles, 6 sacks last year at Georgia Tech. He had a monster year. You also returned Debo Williams at linebacker, 113 tackles last year. Nick Emanwari also returns at strong safety, 71 tackles last year, 85 in his true freshman season in 2022. So he was a little bit, his production was a little bit down, but Debo Williams' production was a little bit better. It's kind of a good sign if your linebackers are the ones making tackles and not your strong safety. All right, who else do we need to talk about? Kai Kroger, returning at punter. This guy is solid. He was really, really good in 2022. His average kind of dipped a little bit in 2023 for whatever reason. Now, let's get into the 2024 schedule. I'm going to throw it up on the big board, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for each one of these games. Let's get into it. All right, 3 games I'm not going to spend a lot of time on at all are 3 games that I call the layups, the gimme games for South Carolina. And these are games that if you lose any of them or actually are in trouble in any of these games, things may be going south for you in a hurry. The first of those being at home on August the 31st against Old Dominion. This is a team that did make a bowl game last year, going 7-6. They bring back starting quarterback Grant Wilson, who was number 99 in the country last year in passing. That's not really necessarily a good thing. Other than that, they don't have a heck of a lot of firepower outside of linebacker Jason Henderson. And this dude is a legit NFL prospect. He tackled 170 he had 170 tackles last year. That's pretty dang good. Jason was all over the damn field, wasn't he? Freaking menace. That also might mean that the rest of the defense is absolute hot garbage. It doesn't matter. That's still really good. You won't have a problem with Old Dominion, though. On September 21st, you take on Akron at home. This is a team that went 2-10 last year in the MAC under former Mississippi State head coach Joe Moorhead. Things just have not worked out there with the Joe Moorhead experience. A lot of inexperienced players, a lot of youth and transfers there. It seems like they have all the time. They just really aren't getting anywhere at all. And before they play the Gamecocks, they face Ohio State on the road. Send prayers up to Akron. And they are on the road at Rutgers. There's 2 teams that are going to beat them very solidly. You might say, well, Rutgers ain't no good team, Carolina Jackpot. They're not a great team. They are a physical team that is going to they're going to destroy Akron, as will the Gamecocks. That should not be a problem. On November the 23rd, you take on Wofford. That's an in-state FCS school. Finished 2-9 last year. Somehow or another, they upset Furman, a team that was ranked in the top 5 at the time. Outside of that, not a lot to note for the Terriers. I don't know what happened to that program. At one time, they were a really good FCS team under head coach Mike Ayers, who was there for like 30 years. But they I don't know, he retired, I believe, or stepped down. I don't know what happened to Mike Ayers, but the program has taken a nosedive, and South Carolina will beat them, no problem. That is the next to last game of the season and is the last home game for you. Now, the meat and potatoes of this schedule is your 8 SEC games and the non-conference game against Clemson. Let's start breaking them down in chronological order. On September 7th, you got a 3:30 matchup against Kentucky on the road in Lexington. Kentucky's bringing back 9 starters on their defense. Last year, that defense was number 14 versus the run, number 33 versus the pass. They were pretty good. They ended up finishing with a 7-6 overall record, which is kind of disappointing. They had a -2 turnover margin. That's tied for 78th in the country. That's really what hurt Kentucky a lot last year. Quarterback Devin Leary actually threw for more yards than anyone in the SEC, but he threw a ton of interceptions as well. He's not there anymore. He's gone. They bring in Brock Vandergriff from Georgia. He's a former 4-star recruit out of high school, a high 4-star, who kind of battled Carson Beck for a couple of years for that backup spot behind Stetson Bennett. Ended up that Carson Beck got the starting job last year. Vandergriff continued to sit the bench, played really, really sparingly, and ended up transferring out. This is a really good get for Kentucky. If you've listened to any of Brock Vandergriff's interviews, I mean, I pictured this guy as someone wearing a starched polo, seersucker shorts, acting like he just stepped out of a BMW, but he's not. He's really cool. He's kind of big country boy, really. So I think he fits in really well there at Kentucky. I think he's going to have a good year. They bring in a transfer running back, train him from Ohio State. This is a 5th-year transfer player who's rushed for just a little over 1,000 yards in his career. Yet again, another guy who sat behind, Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams and some players like that. Ohio State just really not able to crack that too deep, and he ended up transferring out. I think he'll be a big good player for Kentucky. He'll replace Ray Davis in that backfield. They bring back Deion Walker, the big guy who wears number 0 on the defensive line, and J.J. Weaver on the defensive end position. I'm going to give you a loss on this one. I think that playing on the road and this being Lenora Sellers and his first start as an SEC quarterback, I don't think Old Dominion is going to be a real good test. I think Kentucky is. You've beaten them 2 years in a row. I think Mark Stoops is going to be gunning for South Carolina. They play Southern Miss the week before, so maybe a little bit tougher of a test than South Carolina faces, but not much. I don't think it's going to be easy for Kentucky, but I do think that they win this game. It'll probably be a 4-quarter type affair, but give me Kentucky to win this game. You're 1-1 after this game. You return back to Williams-Brice on September 14th to take on LSU. This is a team that returns a ton of experience, but it's on the offensive line. They don't have a lot returning in terms of skill-wise. They do bring back one legitimate wide receiver who played a little bit last year. But gone is Jaden Daniels, the Heisman Trophy winner. Gone is Brian Thomas, NFL draft pick. And gone is Malik Neighbors, an even higher NFL draft pick. They bring Garrett Nussmeier off the bench, who has been the backup quarterback there for a couple of years. He'll lead the offense. Nussmeier is a talented quarterback, but he's more of a pocket passer, and he has very limited mobility. So I think that it's going to be easier for South Carolina to get pressure on a guy like him, obviously, than it would be to get on a Jaden Daniels. Now, LSU, as I said, has an experienced offensive line. But South Carolina's defensive, especially the front four, should be pretty solid this year. I didn't talk about Tonka Hemingway or Alex Boogie Huntley. These are some other guys that can come from that tackle position and put a little bit of pressure on a quarterback as well. Defensively, LSU was horrible last year. They bring in Blake Baker, the defensive coordinator from Mizzou. He has some good players over on that side of the ball in linebacker Harold Perkins and strong safety Major Burns. How good is LSU's defense going to be this year? I don't know, but one could definitely say it's going to be vastly improved over the 2023 edition. With that being said, this game is at home. It's going to be a noon kickoff. It's kind of weird. It's a team that you don't normally play. LSU, to me, is a team that just very rarely meets expectations. They always have a lot of talent, but they don't always do, everything that you'd expect a team with that much talent to be able to do. Now, Brian Kelly, I think, is a step up from Ed Orgeron. I think he's at least a more serious coach, at least on game day, than what Orgeron was. Orgeron's kind of a silly character, I think. Brian Kelly's had his moments as well. But with all that being said, I think South Carolina strikes the upset here and beats LSU in a close and exciting ball game in Williams-Brice, and they go 2-1. Like I said, type in the comment section and tell me how stupid I am. You return home on the 5th of October, to take on Ole Miss. This is a stretch here of 3 in a row in terms of home games. We've already talked about the Akron game, which happened on the 21st of September. That's a win. You have a bye week before you take on Ole Miss. Did you know 18 of their starting 22 players are going to be transfer players? That's unreal. Head of the line there is Jackson Dart, a guy who transferred in a few years ago from the West Coast USC. He's a dual-threat quarterback, threw for 23 touchdowns last year. He's a heck of a player, and he's a legit Heisman Trophy candidate. They have a bevy of wide receiver talent there, including Jordan Watkins, Trey Harris, and their tight end, Caden Priestcorn. These guys combined for about 2,175 yards last year and 15 touchdowns. That offensive line is veteran-laden, and it's bolstered, let's say it, by the portal. And at the running back position, they're going to be just fine there as well. They lost Quinshon Junkins to the portal, but they bring in Ulysses, I don't have his last name, Jones, we'll just call him the fourth, I think. He's got some kind of Roman numeral after his name. He's really good. He played in limited duty last year. Ole Miss will be fine there with the loss of Judkins, I feel like. Defensively, they bring in a defensive tackle transfer, Walter Nolan, out of Texas A&M. And Princely Umi Alanen from Florida, an edge rusher who is a really, really good player and is regarded as an NFL prospect. Chris Paul is another guy who is kind of rounding out these guys who are going to start on defense for Ole Miss that they brought in as transfers this past season. He's from Arkansas, was one of their linebackers, probably the only good player on Arkansas's defense last year. This is going to be very, very tough for South Carolina. We all know about the Juice Wells saga that's been talked about. Look, the guy just transferred there. In the end of the day, I'm not really sure what time this game is going to be. That could play a factor, but I'm going to have to give us a loss against Ole Miss. I don't think that you're going to be able to, Jimmy and Joe's wise, keep up with this team. They're a legitimate playoff team, and I think they could be a dark horse for the national championship. Lane Kiffin's really got it going on in Oxford this year. South Carolina loses this game, and you would fall to 2-2 at this point. 3-2, excuse me. On the 12th of October, you're on the road at Alabama. This is kind of a hard 3-game stretch here for South Carolina. We're going to talk about on the road in Bryant-Denny Stadium against the Crimson Tide. Playoff team from last year, of course, Nick Saban, who coached there since 2007, has retired, stepped down. He's still involved with the program, but they bring in head coach Kalen DeBoer. A lot of people think Alabama's just going to take an absolute step back. Kalen DeBoer is not a legitimate replacement for Nick Saban. One thing I cannot stand is people who automatically jump to conclusions, have no damn idea what they're talking about, and don't give a guy or gal a chance. I think Kalen DeBoer is a really good coach, and I think he's going to do some good things at Alabama. This will be his first season there. He's going to be able to eventually bring in better talent than what he brought in at Washington, and he competed for the national championship there. So just let this man cook, as is the popular term. Of course, quarterback Jalen Milroe, last year he threw for 23 touchdowns, about 2,800 yards, rushed for 531 yards, and 12 touchdowns. It almost fits in the mold of Lenore Sellers there. I think Milroe may have a little bit better of an arm, but you can kind of draw some comparisons. Running back Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, both these guys are young players who have a tremendous upside. Behind a good offensive line that just seems to kind of reload and reload every single year. But Alabama always has a good rushing attack. I don't expect 2024 to deviate from that good rushing attack and the physical style that they're used to. Defensively, they've got a new defensive coordinator there in Kane Womack. That is the former South Alabama head coach. Bring in 3 transfers from Power 5 programs led by L.T. Overton, another guy from Texas A&M. Hearing a lot about Texas A&M transfers. Solid linebacker core there with DeAndre Lawson and Jihad Campbell. Both these guys legitimate SEC first-team players. Teams like this, teams like Ole Miss, teams like even LSU to a point, the difference between them and South Carolina is they are picking up portal players that are good from other Power 5 schools. Outside of Rocket Sanders, who we really don't know what to expect from because he was beat up all last year, South Carolina's bringing in players from Coastal. And that's kind of the difference between us right now and some of the teams in the SEC that we aspire to be. With all that being said, I don't think that South Carolina has the firepower to beat an Alabama team at home. We lose this one as well, and that drops us to 3-3 on the season. And unfortunately, I think you're going to go to 3-4 the next week. You're on the road at Oklahoma. This is a team that plays Texas prior to playing South Carolina, in fact, the week before. So there's a chance there the Sooners could be a little bit beat up. Texas is one of the favorites to win the national championship in 2024, and I don't disagree with that. They play at Ole Miss the next week as well. So if Oklahoma comes into this with maybe just the loss to Texas, well, you could say, well, they may be looking ahead to the game against Ole Miss, who everybody thinks will be really, really good too. Is this a trap game? Maybe. But being on the road, this is a new environment for South Carolina. This is not one of the more intimidating environments in college football, but it's going to be tough, it's going to be loud, and it's going to be difficult for you to play in. A new quarterback there takes over in Jackson Arnold. He's a 5-star. He's got 3 wide receivers returning, and 3 of these 3 guys have averaged over 20 yards per catch last season. They got to rebuild their offensive line, but this is Game 7 that we're playing in here. And they've got a really, really good staff there. They bring in a new offensive coordinator as well. That's Seth Luttrell, a guy who was at one time the head coach at North Texas and had some success there. He's been kind of an analyst or whatever for the past year or so. Kind of studied a little bit under Jeff Lebby, who ended up leaving to take the Mississippi State job. On the defensive side of the football, Danny Stutzman, linebacker, 104 tackles last year. Ranks up among the leaders in the SEC, is a stud on that side of the ball for the Sooners. I do think the Gamecocks make this a game for some reason. I don't know why. I think maybe you kind of get your ass handed to you by Alabama, but I think you come back this week and you make this one a game. But ultimately, that home field advantage, there's a little bit of superior depth, is going to be the deciding factors, and the Sooners get the win in this one. You fall to 3-4. And you get a much-needed bye week, your second one of the season, which is going to be important because we're still here in early November, and you still got 5 games to play. And you return home to take on Texas A&M in Williams-Brice Stadium. They got a new head coach there in Mike Elko. A lot of unknowns surrounding this program, kind of, like they are around the Gamecocks. One thing that we do know is they have a really good quarterback in Connor Wegman. Thing about him is, can he stay healthy? This guy's a 5-star. He's only played in 9 games over the past 2 years, but in those 9 games, he has looked really, really good. The wide receiver room lost Evan Stewart, a really talented kid, to the transfer portal. He ended up going to Oregon. Can they find a standout target in that wide receiver room? By Game 8, I think they will have found that individual. The offensive line for Texas A&M is going to be a question mark as well. This is still a really, really talented roster with a lot of guys who just don't have that much experience playing. You lost your Walter Nolans, your LT Overtons, your aforementioned Evan Stewarts. These guys have all left to go to other programs. But can Mike Elko get these kids who have a lot of talent that are still left on that roster to play up to that level that they should be playing up to? We'll have to see there. The defensive line is going to be the strength of them on the defensive side of the football. They added an edge rusher in Nick Scarrington from Purdue. He led the Big Ten last year in sacks. So that's a big get for Texas A&M. You can find diamonds in the rough, kind of like the Jason Henderson guy at Old Dominion who had like 170 tackles. Who would think that a dude that got 170 tackles would be playing Norfolk, Virginia for Old Dominion? Just like you wouldn't think that Purdue would have the guy who had the most sacks in the Big Ten. But this Scarrington guy is. He will be good at Texas A&M and probably will be a monster for them under Mike Elko, a defensive-minded head coach. This roster, as I said, has talent all over it. How does it all come together? My thing about Texas A&M and South Carolina is this. I think inherently Texas A&M is more talented. However, they were more talented 2 years ago. They cruised in and South Carolina beat them. Now, I know Jimbo Fisher was the coach then. Everybody thinks Mike Elko is going to be better than Jimbo Fisher. Whether he is or is not, that remains to be seen. The big thing with Texas A&M here is Connor Wegman. I think he's going to be able to throw some wide receivers open. He's going to be able to make some good wide receivers out of that wide receiver room, and I expect him to start off the year really good early. But is he going to be healthy by the time they play South Carolina? They will have faced a decent gauntlet of SEC teams. By that point, looks to be the toughest game against Mizzou, and then there's a game against LSU in there the week before. I think, and this is not Carolina Jackpot wishing an injury on anybody, this is just me kind of looking at things and letting facts or letting history kind of dictate the past and present, or I'm letting the past dictate the present and what I think is going to happen in the future. I think Connor Wegman probably likely to be banged up by this time of the season. I think that's going to have a lot to do with this game. And I think South Carolina pulls this one out, strikes another mild upset in terms of where we stand right now, right? Because is that really an upset or is it not? I don't know. By that point in the season, it's not going to be an upset. Right now, you're an underdog. By then, you might not be. Texas A&M may not be all that. I think South Carolina gets a big win here at home and registers their second win in the series against Texas A&M since it started back in 2014. And it moves you to 4-4 on the season. On the 9th, you take on Vanderbilt, and this is a very important game for South Carolina. It's in Nashville. South Carolina has not lost to the Vandy team since 2008. That may be the longest win streak that any SEC team has against another that they've played consecutively at this particular point in time. As of all the old SEC East teams, Vanderbilt had beaten every one of those teams at least once since 2008. That even includes Georgia. So South Carolina, it's not just, some accomplishment to just laugh off that they've beaten Vandy. Even when Vandy was at their best under James Franklin, South Carolina was still beating Vanderbilt. That streak's going to come to an end at some point in time. Is it going to come to an end in 2024? Well, Clark Lee has decided to make some changes. He's shaking some things up there himself. He has gone to the transfer portal deep, and he's bringing in some people with some New Mexico State Aggie roots. Number one, in quarterback Diego Pavios, this dual threat guy who had a really, really good season last year, and he's also bringing his offensive coordinator with him in Tim Beck. And for shits and giggles, they decided to bring the head coach, Jerry Kill, with them too. Now, he's going to be an analyst for Clark Lee. He won't have an on-the-field role but he'll be kind of a mentor, kind of someone in the press box, kind of looking at things. Jerry Kill has had a successful head coaching career when he's been healthy. This guy has battled some seizures. He's had a lot of things happen to him that have kind of hampered him in terms of climbing the coaching ladder. Really had a rough time of it, and it really kind of sucks for him that those things happen. Sometimes life deals good people an unfriendly hand, and it's not really always fair. With that being said, though, I think that's going to improve that Vanderbilt offense. But outside of Pavia, they don't really have a lot of headliner players. They do return a wide receiver there in Quincy Skinner, but they've lost some to the portal. They lost a kid to Boston College who was going to commit to South Carolina. His name escapes me. They also lost Will Shepard to the portal as well. So, I think that Vanderbilt is going to be kind of struggling by this point in the season. Clark Lee decided he's going to take over the defensive side of the football himself and be the defensive coordinator. Last year, they were 128th overall in total defense, so maybe that's a good idea on that front. But when these head coaches take over these coordinator roles, it doesn't ever really work out all that great. We've seen Jimbo Fisher tried to be the offensive coordinator at Texas A&M. He got fired. Billy Napier's tried to kind of be the offensive coordinator at Florida. That hasn't worked out either. They've had like 3 losing seasons in a row. I think South Carolina wins on the road at Vanderbilt here, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to be that easy. I think you come in here riding high off that win over Texas A&M, and maybe you struggle a little bit against Vanderbilt, but you end up putting them away. I also don't see Vanderbilt winning a conference game this year either, just as a kind of a side note there. I think this may be the last year that Clark Lee is in Nashville, unfortunately. On the 16th, you're at home against Missouri. This is another team that is absolutely loaded with talent. They have hopes for the college football playoff as well. Question marks for them is on the offensive line. They're going to be replacing 2 starters with some transfers. Outside of that, the offense is going to be outstanding. Quarterback Brady Cook really came into his own last year, and he has got 3 huge weapons there. And, of course, Luther Burden, the guy who's going to be a first-round draft pick, Theo Weiss, and Mookie Cooper. Both these guys transferred in from Oklahoma and Ohio State, respectively. At running back, they bring in Marcus Carroll, a transfer from Georgia State, who only ran for about 1,300 yards last year to replace Cody Schrader, who was kind of the heart and soul of the Mizzou team last year. You got a lot of people saying Mizzou ain't going to be no good this year because they ain't got that Schrader kid anymore. Marcus Carroll may be better. He may be better. Nate Noel is another guy that's kind of a home run hitter that transferred in from Stanford a couple of years ago. And they could kind of be a little bit of a 1-2 punch there. Offensively, I really don't expect Mizzou to take a step back at all. In fact, they may take another step forward. Defensively is where their problems may come into play. They lost 2 starters at corner to the NFL in Ennis Rakestraw and Chris Abrams Drain. I don't know why when I say Chris Abrams Drain, I have to throw motherfucking in the middle of that too. But they lost him too. So they were really good. Up front, they're still solid. They got a guy named Johnny Walker. What a name for a football player. Mizzou's going to be really good this season. And I think this is a game where South Carolina plays really well. Plays maybe better than they have against Mizzou the past couple of years, but I still think you end up losing this game late. I think Mizzou takes this one. Side note, under Shane Beamer, South Carolina has won their last home SEC game of the season straight up 2 times as an underdog, and 2 of those times as double-digit underdogs in 2021 against Auburn and 2022 against Tennessee. Last year as Kentucky, they were a slight favorite, and they won that game as well. This year, I think that streak kind of comes to an end. Mizzou's too talented, and I do think you lose that one. Your final game of the season is on the road at Clemson. You're coming into this with a 6-5 record, right? You've already exceeded the Vegas win total, so, you're feeling good. You're coming off a win against Wofford, which we talked about earlier, and you got to take on the Tigers in Death Valley. Nobody knows what time this game is going to be. All that we know is it's going to be a hotly contested one, just like it always is. I think that the much maligned Clemson quarterback, Cade Klubnik, is going to be a better player this year. I think Garrett Riley is going to come into his own as a Power 5 coordinator, and I think that Cade's going to make some better decisions with the football in his hands, and their coaching on that side of the ball is going to improve a little bit. I hate to say that, but that's just what I feel just by looking at the roster and from things that I've heard. Their offensive line's got to get a lot better than what it has been the past couple of years. That's been kind of their Achilles heel, and line of scrimmage play at Clemson's always been really, really good on the defensive side of the ball, but the offensive line side has always been kind of suspect, but the defense has always been able to carry the offense. This year, you're going to need both of those to kind of work together, or not really work together, but you're going to have them work as separate units and be successful if you're going to be able to have a good year. Running the ball, I think that Phil Maffa is at least on par with Will Shipley, who they had, and he's going to be the bell cow. He's going to be doing the majority of the carries there for Clemson. I look for this guy to go for over 1,000 yards this year, and if he can hold on to the football, you could be looking at a legitimate all-ACC type of player. I think the receiving core is going to be better as well. That wasn't very good last year, but they do bring back Antonio Brown, who will be a sophomore this year, I think, who was injured most of last season. And they bring in two really good freshmen in Brian Westco and TJ Moore to bolster that receiving core. Defensively, Clemson's always going to be solid, led by Peter Woods up front. This guy's very agile. He's playing the defensive end position this year. Barrett at linebacker. Barrett Carter is another NFL-type player, along with R.J. Mickens at strong safety. These guys are all really, really good. I could go on and on about their defense, but, they bring the talent in there and I thought they were going to take a step back after Brent Venables left, and they brought in Wes Goodman to coordinate the defense, but things have not fallen off at all defensively there. So that game being on the road, it's your last game of the season. No matter what you say about Dabo, his Dabo-isms, his silliness, his refusal to use the transfer portal, I think they still have superior depth to what we have, and I think that South Carolina may be a little bit beat up by this point in the season, and I think you end up losing this game. And another one that may be close, but you lose to Clemson, and you end up at 6-6 on the season, which exceeds the Vegas win total. It's not a good season by my standards. You should at least have a winning record and be in a bowl every year, but it's not a horrible season in terms of expectations that everyone else has placed upon you. Please, feel free to communicate with me. Let me know down in the comment section below, like I said, how dumb I am, how South Carolina will be lucky to win 4 games, just the whole 9 yards. I've already given you my arguments for why they are not as bad as what you may think, and so now you can give me your arguments why they are much worse than what I think. You guys and gals have a great one. I will see you all later. Sorry for the long video, but hey, it had to get out. Appreciate it. Peace, and I'm out. Go Gamecocks.